How we doing? How we doing? This is Destination Denver, Colorado, and today, listen, you've heard all the sales slogans, you've seen the headlines, you've seen the marry the house, date the rate, it's a great time to buy. Today, we are ignoring all headlines and we're talking about the real and raw housing market update for November 2025, and we're starting right now. All right, this is Destination Denver, Colorado. I'm your host, Jimmy Everett. Listen, there are two things that we try to accomplish here on this channel. One, we talk all things living in the Denver metro area and Colorado Front Range, living, eating, breathing, experiencing. And two, as a licensed mortgage broker covering the entire state of Colorado and team with some of the state's most talented realtors, we are helping people like yourself move to this beautiful state of ours. So now that we're done with that film-filled stuff, let's get to what we're here for, and that is, what is the story on the Denver and to some extent the national housing market? All right, so to get into the housing market, we really have to start with this competition, this combat between the people who want to make fluff about the market and how wonderful it is, and the doomsayers who say that everything is falling apart and we're going to have a market crash at any moment, when the reality is somewhere very much in between, and probably, if I'm being real, leaning towards the fluff more so than the crash. But let's talk about some of the dynamics, some of the talking points that realtors, lenders, headlines, these news articles are coming out with. So Realtor.com recently suggested that the week of October 12th to the 18th would be the best week of the year to buy a house. And they stated that would be because there was more inventory on the market, which was overall true, less competition, which again, to some extent, accurate, and the fact that interest rates had trended down from nearly 7% to the low sixes. All of that pretty accurate, and yet again, within my industry, we just can't help ourselves. We're never gonna tell you it's a bad time to buy, so because it's never a bad time, there's always a good time. And this is just another example of that. And this plays into other talking points that my industry has loved. People who started using the term marry the house, date the rate, which I talk smack about every opportunity I get. I think it's one of the worst sales slogans ever created in mankind, and the fact that people still use it 3 years later is wild to me. But then at the same time, you know, you get on YouTube and I'm sure you've seen the thumbnails. Sellers are frustrated, crash, crash, crash. And I assure you, we are very much nowhere near that, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and we'll talk about exactly where we stand. And why do these things frustrate me to begin with? Because at the end of the day, Realtor.com creating an article saying that this is the best week to buy a house isn't the worst thing in the world. But as a military veteran, as somebody who has really leaned on strategy throughout my life, I'm not a believer in hope solving things. And to me, the moment I heard marry the house, date the rate, that was hope. That was not strategy. So today, we're gonna dive into what is truly happening and what should or could be your strategy around that aspect. All right, so here is the data. So as of September of 2025, and I know we're at the very beginning of November, but data for October won't come out for a few weeks yet. So as of September, the detached median close price in the Denver metro area sat at $638,250. Attached, so condos, townhomes, primarily being dragged down price point wise by condos, sat at $390,000. What made this interesting, among other things, was the fact that inventory, we saw almost about 17.6% increase in the amount of homes on the market. And that's something that nationwide we've been missing, was this inventory. We've gained a lot. Median days on market, meaning, again, that middle number of how long houses sat on the market, was 35 to 37 days. Again, why does that matter? Well, you talked during the pandemic of moments where houses would sit on the market for maybe a week or two. They'd sit on the market for a day before they got under contract. They'd only be on the market for 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks max. It was a pretty quick turnaround. So to see 35 to 37 days for a house to be on the market is a very good sign as far as the market itself balancing, which is a term you're gonna hear me use multiple times during this video. Now, as far as prices, which everybody gets stuck on, so detached home prices have increased about 1.3% year over year. That's not even keeping up with inflation. So when you're talking about actual value of these homes, we're pretty level. Attached home prices have dropped 3.35%. So again, you talk about inflation, that boosts the price of just about everything. Housing is part of that. If your inflation is right around 3%, where we sit now, you would expect home prices, for the most part, to keep up with that in a normal market, but they have not currently. Now, a good sign, and again, there's many, is that closed sales have increased 7% year over year and pending sales have increased 4%. So a sign that more deals, more houses are moving on this market. Sellers aren't just waiting forever. Now, everything changes in this market when we look year to year and we look month to month. So from a month to month standpoint, detached prices fell 1.8%. Attached prices actually increased 1.2% from August going into September. And closed sales again dropped, detached down about 2%, attached down 8%. So month to month, things moved a little for the worse, if you will, but year over year, still very strong. And what does this mean to you? It means that we're seeing longer market times, we're seeing flat to slightly higher prices, and you're seeing more inventory. That means choice is back. That means the momentum, this heat of the market is gone. And that's really what we would call a split market. You call it balanced, whatever you want to say. It is definitely giving more leeway towards buyers than it has in over a decade. But the interesting aspect of this, especially when we're talking about Denver and the Denver metro area, obviously everything's a little different nationally, is that it's just not a Denver metro situation. You can't just look at the Denver metro and say this is how things are. There really is a divergence depending on what area and what price point you're in. So when we say it's not just one market, that it's a collection of these micro markets, you look at your entry level homes that sit between, let's say, roughly $350,000 to $500,000. And I know some of you hear that and say entry level $500,000. I don't blame you. That's how I thought when I first moved here. But those entry-level homes are really holding their prices well for the most part, given a little bit, but those are pretty strong because there's still a large need from the community to buy those houses. Now, when you talk about luxury homes, the ones that are above or well above $1 million, you're starting to see, larger, or the bigger slowdowns in that area, and obviously the bigger swings in price point, there's more money involved there. So the difference between these different market prices is huge. And there's also like subsections as far as areas. So when we look at Lakewood, where I live, or Golden just to our west, the days on market in Lakewood and Golden have been longer than a lot of areas in the market. I mean, we're well over, we're sitting right around 40 days, 45 days at the moment. You go north to Arvada, or you go south of Lakewood into Littleton, days on the market is less. Price point changes are less substantial in those two, Arvada and Littleton, than in Lakewood and Golden. Now, obviously, those are only 4 of the many suburbs Denver has to offer, but just something to consider, that it's not a one-size-fits-all. Different areas are handling the market differently. And among the areas really citywide that are facing, the biggest challenge are the attached market, the condos. The condo market has a lot of question marks about it, and that comes from HOA challenges, whether it's getting the unit approved, HOAs having issues themselves, or people flat out not wanting to buy a condo because they don't want to deal with a $400, $500, $600 plus HOA that doesn't really offer a whole lot back. Many of these communities don't give you any amenities. You're just giving them $600 for some cash reserves and some maintenance. It's not really worth it for a lot of people. And I mean, talking about all these numbers is all well and good, but how does it apply to, the average person? So when we look at a median sales price of $638,000, if you look at that with 20% down, and let's use 6.3% as our interest rate, that means the principal and interest on that home is going to be about $3,160. You tack on insurance, tack on property taxes, and maybe a small HOA on that, and all of a sudden your payment's at $4,100 for a $640,000 price point. Now, people can get really good value on a house if they can afford that $4,100 payment, but it is suffocating a lot of people and keeping them obviously away from the market, which is why houses are sitting on the market longer. And so that is the real battle, is affordability. Take that $4,100 payment as just an example. So the median income in the Denver metro area sits right around $110,000. And so if you have a $4,100 mortgage payment and you make gross $110,000 a year, that puts your debt versus your income at roughly 45% just on your housing cost off the bat. And that's really what is suffocating a lot of people and keeping them in rentals or in the house they already own. So the conversation I have with people is really, if you can't forget marry the house and date the rate, if you can't marry the payment for 5 to 7 years, I wouldn't suggest buying that particular house or being at that particular payment. And again, the hope of lower rates and the hope of a refinance in the future to lower your payment is not a strategy and not sound. So really, if you are considering buying a house, focus on that monthly payment and how sustainable that is. Now, what are some of these aspects as far as our supply and our inventory when we're talking about these micro dynamics? So currently, roughly 80% of homeowners nationwide have an interest rate below 6%. And again, we're sitting in the low sixes right now. So 8 out of 10 homeowners have an interest rate that is most likely superior to what the current interest rate is. More than 50% of homeowners have an interest rate below 4%. If they have a mortgage at all, obviously you have a lot of homes that are free and clear. So half of these homes on the market have an interest rate that is multiple points better than the market. That is keeping a lot of people from wanting to sell their house. It's keeping a lot of people from wanting to put their house on the market, knowing not only might they get beat up a bit on the sale, which is common, again, that's why buyers have some advantage, but they know that they're going to pay a lot of times a much higher payment each month as they move to another house. And at the same time all of this is happening, you have higher builder costs, which is limiting new supply. Right now, detached homes over a $2 million price point carry nearly a 6-month inventory. And that is something we haven't faced in a long time. A 6-month inventory, meaning the average days on market for some of these properties sitting at 180 days plus, is wild. New construction costs are up roughly 4.6% due to tariffs, and we'll get into the details there on lumber, steel, copper, and that's impact. And again, as these builders take on costs, they build less, they have a tough time selling the house at the same cost. Obviously, it costs them more. Builders are already providing some incredible incentives for people to come and buy these houses. There's only so much margin. So that challenge of getting more people to sell their house, even though they have a really good interest rate or they don't have a mortgage on their house at all, and the fact that the current climate of building homes is more expensive. And we won't even get to how expensive it is to build a house in Denver with all its permits and its regulation there. We'll be here for another hour if I go down that path. So what's the why behind this market? What's the macro factor we're looking at? Well, currently the Federal Reserve, which of course controls short-term interest rates, not long-term directly, so no direct control over mortgage rates, they have shifted their fight from inflation, which still sits at roughly 3% when their goal was 2%, and they have moved towards focusing on the job market and those economic factors. So because the job market has shown some severe constrictions, we've had low job growth, unemployment has ticked up a little bit, hiring is basically frozen. They have pivoted, and in September they made their first Fed fund rate cut, and there's anticipation, most likely by the time you see this video, they will have made another one in October, or an announcement will have been made, and we may see yet another in December. Now, as far as a lot of these mortgage rates you're seeing, understand that mortgage rates tend to get ahead of what they think the Fed is going to do. So if these mortgage-backed security markets think the Fed is going to cut in October and December, odds are you have already seen that in current interest rates. So if you watch this video and you see that the Fed cut rates since I made it, don't expect that mortgage rates are better after the fact. If they are, it would be, in my opinion, slight, but most likely we'll actually see rates increase after, at least briefly, see them increase after that cut. That is typically how it goes because of how, again, ahead of everything the mortgage-backed security market tends to be. And as I mentioned, this is just this quick pivot, or maybe long-winded pivot, I should say, because inflation was always, or has been for multiple years, the focus. How do we get inflation down? And as of the latest CPI, or Consumer Price Index, which is how we basically monitor the price. It's one of the reports we get to monitor the prices of things and how much they are increasing or decreasing in price. We're sitting at 2.99% on the CPI, or inflation, month over month. The core CPI is sitting at 2.95%. So normally that might hinder the Fed from cutting rates. But at the same time, they've looked at cooled inflation. It hasn't moved a lot higher, even though a lot of people expected it might. At the same time, the job market has cooled. We were used to seeing job numbers in the six figures, 120, 130,000 plus jobs every month. Well, the September jobs report came out and only added 45 to 50,000 jobs nationally. A lot of these reports have been adjusted down after the fact. So, a couple months later, you get a report and it's adjusted to an even lower number. So because of this, the Fed has really had to pivot. And that's the biggest piece for why the market is pricing in more cuts. You've got weak jobs, and that means the Fed has to act faster than they might have otherwise wanted to. And as much as we have not seen the full brunt of what's going to occur yet, tariffs have quietly raised costs across the board. So you've seen a 10 to 25% increase on lumber. You've seen about a 25% increase on the cost of steel and aluminum. And you've seen a 50% increase on the price of copper, among other things. When you talk about lumber and steel and copper and aluminum, these are the key components to building houses. And when all of them have seen an increase, of 10, 25, 50%, that's substantial. The builders can't take on all of that. So they either have to increase price or lower, the concessions, what they're allowed to offer you as far as incentives, or flat out not build as many houses because they can't afford to. That is a direct hit to housing affordability and the builder's margin. At the end of the day, we can talk about how we don't want companies to gouge us, but we need companies to make at least a decent amount of money to where they want to keep continuing to build their product in large numbers, and that's what we need for housing. Now, the mechanism in all of this is the fact that mortgages don't follow the Fed, as we talk about a lot. Usually they follow the 10-year Treasury, or they're pretty aligned with the 10-year Treasury. The mortgage-backed security market and the 10-year Treasury, they compete for the same dollar. So as the 10-year Treasury drops, and right now it's sitting right around a 4% yield, so too do mortgage rates. And as the 10-year Treasury gets a little sticky, it doesn't. So a weak jobs report, it makes investors nervous about the economy, and that means they typically will sell stocks, and they'll move that money from stocks into safer bonds like treasuries. And so when demand for bonds rise, you see bond prices go up and yields or interest rates go down. So the more money that goes into the mortgage-backed security market, the better interest rates get. And again, you see that because the 10-year Treasury, as of the making of this video, it had dropped to about 4.04% from 4.11%. And that also improved mortgage interest rates from 6.35% to an average of 6.27%. So it's not this huge swing, but certainly gradually moving in the right direction. So what's the playbook? What does this mean for you? So let's wave a magic wand, and while I do not believe this is going to happen, let's say that rates fell to 5.75%. Well, realistically, home prices, even though some people say would skyrocket, odds are, especially in your higher price point markets, home prices would stay pretty flat, and your buying power would improve by roughly 6%, 7% overall. Again, highly unlikely. What is more likely to happen is that rates remain somewhere between 6 to 6.3% for several more months. And again, that means prices stay flat, and that keeps a pretty neutral environment where sellers aren't necessarily getting their way. They're still having to work a lot with buyers to get their houses sold. And yet buyers are not necessarily getting, the lowest payment known to man. They're getting as comfortable as they can. And again, they're focusing on that payment, and that's what they're marrying. That's what they're having a relationship with. And worst case, which again, I don't see any real possible way this happens, and that's rates increase. They get back into the high 6s, 7%. And at that point, yes, you would see home prices start to drop. Then we would have a serious problem, but there is no data, there are no analytics that lead us in that direction. Now for sellers, and this is really where the market's been difficult, because sellers have this number in their head. They've seen a Z estimate at some point, who knows, maybe it was back in 2021 or 2022. They think their house is worth a certain price point. And even if they kind of understand that it's not anymore, they still want to try for it. So a lot of times sellers will dangle a number of, this is how much I want to sell my house for. And it sounds all well and good, but you really can't do that in this market anymore, because if you put your house on the market and the price is too high, you don't get any showings, you don't get any offers, and very quickly you are dead in the water. So for sellers, it is important that you list now at a realistic price. And when I say list now, I don't mean now, I mean in general, listing at a realistic price. And it's ideal that you list it at a price that's going to allow you to sell within that 35 to 37 day range. That you want to be the house that gets a lot of activity right off the bat and gets off the market, rather than being the house that sits. The longer you sit, the more buyers can really not just come storming your house, but beat you up on price, beat you up on concessions, beat you up on inspection. And some sellers, listen, if you're watching this in November, and I do not sell homes for a living, I help people buy them for a living, but as sellers, you start getting into November and December, odds are if you don't have to make a move, you're probably gonna either take that house off the market through November and December and get it back on in January. And if you haven't listed it already and you don't need to, it might be a situation where just hang tight, wait until the new year, be prepared. And then once buyers start coming out, usually the first, second week of January, that's when you put your house back on the market. And I'm gonna tell you right now, because I see it time and time again with my buyers, or even my buyers who are currently in the midst of selling a house. Your worst case scenario is that you overprice your home, that it sits for a long time, that you make multiple price cuts where the buyers potentially can see that you drop the price 10 grand, 25 grand, 50 grand. And before you know it, there's blood in the water and they know that they can have their way with you. The house has been sitting forever. There's no other offers. Why not lowball you by 50 grand, 75 grand, 100 grand? And it sounds crazy to say that, because there was a time when people would ask me, can we offer 50 grand less? And I would say, talk to your realtor, but I highly doubt it. And now on some of these houses, it's hard not to think that it's worth a shot. Wrapping up a couple things, and again, this could be relieved by the time you see this video, but unlikely. So currently we are still sitting in a government shutdown. What does that mean to you? Well, it means, we're dealing with government shutdowns, the potential for FHA loans to be delayed, although we haven't seen it yet. Potential for VA loans to be delayed, though we have not seen that. Conventional loans seem to be moving right along. You're seeing still a lot of fluctuation with tariffs. I believe Trump is as of today, talking with China, hopefully get some clarity there, but still the unknowns there. And then again, the political volatility, which is all impacting and has this ripple effect on housing. So if the shutdown stalls, you could certainly, and the longest shutdown we've had is 35 days. We're over 20 at this point. It's very likely the shutdown is going to be the longest in history. So that could delay FHA, VA, USDA processing. Those are all government loans at some point. And there is some talk that, the length of this could push more investors towards bonds. And again, if they move their money towards bonds, that betters the 10-year Treasury, lowers the yield of the 10-year Treasury, lowers mortgage rates. Haven't really seen that yet, but something to keep an eye on. And again, I try to keep a lot of my political thoughts to myself. When it comes to tariffs, not a huge fan, and we still have not seen exactly how that's going to play out. But right now, tariffs continue to be a hidden tax on at least the housing creation process. So we'll see where that goes in the near and long-term future. And the last thing I would mention, because I get a lot of calls from people who are, you're in different parts of the country, and again, it's not a one-size-fits-all problem. I mean, heck, Denver Metro has differences between its different areas, let alone nationwide. So, as an example, the city of Houston was so hot during the pandemic that they have currently seen prices come down about 12% over the last 3 years. Not 12% per year, but 12% over those 3 years. Rochester, New York, at the same time, Southern Canada, I joke, I love you. They are up 31% over the last 3 years, again, combined. Whereas Denver is up about 1.3% over that 3-year span. So you got Austin, a market that was so hot during the pandemic, those prices have come down. You got Rochester, a city that didn't see quite this massive influx during the pandemic that you might have normally seen. So their market is now hot. A lot of people moving, moving east or moving Midwest-ish. I know Rochester's not in the Midwest, don't get me wrong. I know my geography, at least a little bit. But this dynamic, whereas Denver's kind of right in the middle. The hotter the market was, especially the hotter the market was during the pandemic, the cooler it is currently, and the more stable that your market was, or even down, I say down very loosely, but the cooler your market was during the pandemic, the hotter it tends to be. And so I emphasize, we're not crashing. There is nowhere near the type of desperation, nowhere near the lates, and people will start filling your head with stuff about, all these FHA late loans and things of that nature. One, you need massive loss of jobs. You need massive people in desperation, and keeping in mind that, again, 80% of mortgages are below 6% and half of them are below 4%. And many of these homes are owned free and clear. So not the desperation needed for any type of crash. A long-term correction in which we just don't see growth, or maybe we only see 1 or 2%, especially in these hotter markets, year over year for multiple years, is what I believe will happen or is happening. And I also believe it's the healthiest thing for the market. So to me, man, things like marry the house, date the rate, it's the laziest, it's the most irresponsible line in real estate. It's one that the moment somebody says anything to you, the moment anybody tells you to do something in real estate with the idea that it's temporary, just do this and it'll be okay in the future, that is not a strategy, and I would run from it as fast as possible. Because at the end of the day, you're betting on something you can't control. I mean, refinancing costs money. Somebody can tell you it's free. There are still costs to it. There's no guarantee that you requalify for a refinance. You don't know what's going to happen with the job market, different things moving there. And there are plenty of people who bought in 2023 that are expecting rates to hit the 5s and are still waiting. And they're still waiting house poor. So they bought in 22 or 23. They were told right around the corner it's going to be fine, and they're still hanging tight. So there it is. There is the Denver November 2025 unfiltered, raw, no rah-rah housing market update. And as I will always say, it is not the right time to buy. It's the right time to buy intentionally. If it's in the best interest for you and yours, heck yeah, let's put together a plan, let's do it. And that's a perfect time to hit me up. My number and email here on your screen. Know that I am always the person. Answer your phone calls, answer your texts, answer your emails. There, winning if you need me. This is Destination Denver, Colorado. I'm your host, Jim Everett. That was the real and raw Denver housing market update for November. Until I see you next time, peace.